The winter wind in Oakhaven, Michigan, had teeth. It bit through the thin glass of the diner windows, rattling the frames every time a gust swept down Main Street. Inside Betty's home-style grill, the air was thick with the smell of frying bacon, stale coffee, and wet wool. It was the dinner rush on a Tuesday, usually a slow night. But tonight, the booths were packed with people trying to escape the freezing sleet. Sarah moved through the chaos like a dancer who had memorized the steps, but lost the music. She was 28, though the dark circles under her hazel eyes made her look older. Her uniform was clean but frayed at the collar, a testament to how long she had been running on empty. In her apron pocket, burning a hole against her hip, was a folded piece of paper, an eviction notice, 3 days. She had 3 days to come up with $600, or she and her 4-year-old daughter, Lily, would be sleeping in her rusted sedan. Order up. Sarah, the cook, yelled from the pass-through window, slamming a plate of meatloaf onto the metal counter. "Coming, Al," she called back, her voice steady despite the panic fluttering in her chest. She grabbed the plates, balancing them on her arm, and wove through the crowded tables. She smiled at the regulars. She refilled coffees before the cups were empty. She was good at this job. She was good at pretending she wasn't drowning. Then, a miracle happened at table 4. Mr. Henderson, a retired mechanic with grease permanently etched into his knuckles, stood up to leave. He caught Sarah's arm gently as she passed. "You take care of that little girl, you hear?" he grunted, sliding a bill under his coffee mug. Sarah looked down. It wasn't a 5, it wasn't a 10, it was a crisp $100 bill. Benjamin Franklin stared up at her. A lifeline in green ink. Her breath hitched. This was it. This was the groceries for the week. This was a quarter of the rent. This was hope. "Mr. Henderson, I can't," she whispered, her hands trembling. "Don't argue with an old man." He winked, pulling his coat tight. "Merry Christmas early." He walked out into the snow, leaving Sarah standing there, clutching the bill like it was a holy relic. She quickly tucked it into her pocket, separate from her other tips. She patted it once, just to make sure it was real. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight on her chest lightened. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to make it, but the relief was short-lived. The bell above the door jingled aggressively. A blast of Arctic air cut through the warmth of the diner. Heads turned. A man walked in. He was out of place in Oakhaven. He wore a charcoal wool suit that probably cost more than Sarah made in a year. His shoes were polished Italian leather, currently being ruined by the road salt. His face was sharp, handsome, but hardened by a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. He was on his phone, speaking in low, clipped tones, ignoring the room. Trailing behind him was a boss. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. He was small for his age, drowning in a puffer coat that looked brand new but stiff. And he was sobbing. Not the loud, tantrum screaming of a bratty child, but the deep, heaving sobs of a heart that had been broken. He clutched a broken strap of a backpack, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. The man didn't look back at the boy. He just pointed to a booth in the corner, snapped his fingers at Sarah, and sat down without ending his call. Sarah felt a prickle of unease. She looked at the boy. He climbed into the booth opposite the man, wiping his nose on his sleeve. The man didn't offer a napkin. He didn't offer a hug. He just kept talking about margins and liquidation. Sarah took a deep breath. She patted the $100 bill in her pocket for courage and walked toward the corner booth. She didn't know it yet, but the man in the suit wasn't just a customer. He was a test, and the test was about to begin. Sarah approached the table with her notepad ready, forcing her professional smile into place. Up close, the dynamic was even worse. The man, whose name she would later learn was James, radiated an aura of impatience. He tapped a gold pen against the table, his eyes glued to the screen of his phone. "I don't care about the logistics, Michael. Just get it done." James muttered into the phone, then hung up with a sharp click. He finally looked up at Sarah. His eyes were gray, flat, and completely devoid of warmth. Black coffee and a grilled cheese for the kid, nothing else. He didn't ask the boy what he wanted. He didn't even look at him. Sarah shifted her gaze to the child. The boy, Leo, was trying to stifle his sobs, his small shoulders shaking violently. On the table in front of him lay the source of his misery. It was an action figure, or it used to be. It was an old, vintage superhero toy, the paint chipped and faded, but now it was in 2 pieces. The head had snapped off from the body. I can fix it, Dad," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "I think I can glue it," James sighed, a sound of heavy exasperation. He picked up the menu and didn't look over the top of it. "It's trash, Leo. Stop crying over garbage. It's embarrassing. It's not garbage." Leo cried out, his voice cracking. "Mom gave it to me. It was her favorite." The mention of Mom made the air in the booth drop 10 degrees. James lowered the menu slowly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. For a second, Sarah saw something flash in his eyes. Pain, raw and jagged. But he buried it instantly under a layer of ice. "Your mother," James said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is gone, and that toy is broken, just like everything else. Now be quiet and eat your sandwich when it comes." Sarah felt a physical blow to her stomach. The cruelty was casual, effortless. She looked at Leo. The boy shrank back against the vinyl seat, looking small and defeated. He picked up the broken toy pieces and cradled them to his chest, tears dripping onto the plastic. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. "I can bring some super glue from the back." "Maybe we can." "We don't need glue," James cut her off, his eyes snapping to hers. "We need coffee." "Do your job, please." Sarah clamped her mouth shut, her face burned. She turned and walked back to the kitchen, her hands clenched into fists. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through her. She wanted to scream at the man. She wanted to shake him. How could a father look at his grieving son and feel nothing? As she waited for the grill cook to melt the cheese, she watched them from the service window. Leo was still crying, silently now. Huge tears rolling down his face. He looked so lonely. Sarah thought of her own daughter, Lily. Lily didn't have much. They lived in a drafty apartment, ate discount cereal, and wore thrift store coats, but Lily knew she was loved. Sarah would walk through fire to make sure Lily smiled. This boy, this wealthy, well-dressed boy, was starving, not for food, but for kindness. The cook slid the plate onto the counter. "Table 6 looks rough," he muttered. "You have no idea," Sarah whispered. She picked up the plate and the coffee pot. She walked back to the table. As she set the coffee down, she saw Leo trying to push the head of the toy back onto the body, his hands shaking too much to make it stick. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes red and swollen. It was a look of pure hopelessness. "I can't fix it," he whispered to her, so quietly his father couldn't hear. "I ruined it." Sarah's heart shattered. She touched her pocket. The crisp $100 bill crinkled against her fingertips. The rent money, the eviction notice, the future. She looked at the man who was back on his phone, scrolling through emails, ignoring the devastation sitting 3 feet away from him. Sarah made a choice. It wasn't a logical choice. It was a reckless, stupid, beautiful choice. She knew there was a toy store 2 blocks over that stayed open late for the holidays. She knew they sold vintage replicas. But she couldn't leave her shift, and she couldn't fix the toy. But she could give him the means to fix his hope. The diner noise seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of Leo's sniffles and the scratching of James's pen on a napkin. Sarah stood at the edge of the table, her hand deep in her apron pocket. Her fingers traced the edges of the bill. $100. It was electricity for a month. It was Lily's asthma medication copay. It was safety. But looking at Leo, she saw something more urgent than safety. She saw a child believing that he was alone in the universe. That belief, once it takes root, is harder to fix than any broken bone. Sarah took a breath that rattled in her lungs. She pulled the bill out. She folded it small, hiding Benjamin Franklin's face until it was just a tiny square of green paper. "Excuse me," Sarah said softly. James didn't look up. "I didn't ask for the check. I'm not talking to you," Sarah said. Her voice was firmer this time. James stopped writing. He looked up, surprised by her tone. Sarah knelt down next to the booth, bringing herself to Leo's eye level. She ignored the father's glare. She reached out and gently took Leo's hand, the one not holding the broken toy. His skin was cold. "Hey," she whispered, "Leo, right?" The boy nodded, sniffing. "I used to have a toy just like that." Sarah lied, and you know what? When it broke, I thought the magic was gone too, but it wasn't. She pressed the folded $100 bill into his small palm and closed his fingers over it. "This is for you," she whispered urgently. "There's a toy store on 4th Street. They have the best superheroes. You get your dad to take you there, and you buy the biggest, strongest one they have." "Okay, a bodyguard for this one." Leo opened his hand. His eyes went wide. He had likely seen money before, but perhaps never given with such intensity from a stranger. That's a lot." Leo stammered. "It's a magic tip." Sarah smiled, tears pricking her own eyes. "It only works if you stop crying. And remember that broken things can still be loved." Across the table, James went still. He stared at the money in his son's hand. He knew what a waitress made. He knew this was likely her entire night's earnings, maybe her week's. He watched Sarah stand up, smoothing her apron, her face pale but determined. "Why?" James asked. The single word hung in the air, stripped of its earlier arrogance. He wasn't looking at his phone anymore. He was looking at Sarah with a piercing, confused intensity. Sarah turned to him. She didn't care about the tip he wouldn't leave. She didn't care if he complained to her manager. "Because he's hurting," Sarah said simply, "and you weren't helping. Someone had to." The silence that followed was heavy. The other diners continued to eat, unaware that a battle for a soul had just taken place in the corner booth. James looked from Sarah to Leo. Leo was looking at the money and then at his father. "Dad," Leo whispered. "She gave me her money." James looked at the bill, then he looked at his son's face. For the first time all night, he actually saw the boy. He saw the red eyes. He saw the grief that mirrored his own, and he saw the shock that a stranger cared more than his own father did in that moment. James's face crumbled slightly. The mask of the cold businessman slipped. He looked like he was about to say something, an apology perhaps, or a thank you, but old habits die hard. The walls slammed back up. He cleared his throat aggressively and stood up, buttoning his expensive jacket. "Let's go, Leo," James said, his voice stiff. "But the sandwich." Leo said, clutching the bill. "We're leaving," James commanded. He threw a $20 bill onto the table for the food they barely touched. He didn't add a tip. Sarah watched them go. James walked fast, the bell jingling violently as he pushed out into the snow. Leo scrambled to catch up, clutching his broken toy in one hand and Sarah's $100 in the other. He looked back once, just before the door closed, and gave Sarah a small, sad wave. Sarah stood by the empty booth. The table was clear except for the $20 for the meal. No tip. She had just given away her rent money. She had given away her safety net to a rich man's son who probably had a playroom full of toys. The reality of what she had done crashed down on her. Her legs went weak. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "You idiot," she whispered to herself. "You stupid, soft-hearted idiot." The rest of the shift was a blur of misery. Every time the door opened, Sarah flinched, hoping it was Mr. Henderson coming back to tell her he made a mistake, or maybe James returning to give the money back. But no one came. At 10 o'clock, Betty, the owner, flipped the sign to closed. "Go on home, hun." Betty said, counting the till. "You look like you're gonna pass out." Sarah nodded numbly. She changed out of her uniform in the cramped bathroom, pulling on her thin coat. She walked out the back door into the alleyway. The snow had turned to sleet, coating the dumpsters in ice. The cold air burned her face. She leaned against the brick wall and slid down until she was crouching in the slush. She pulled the eviction notice out of her pocket. She stared at the bold red letters. She had nothing now, $70 in tips for the night. It wasn't enough. She would have to call her sister and beg. She would have to sell her TV, maybe her blood plasma. "Why do I do this?" She sobbed into her knees. "Why do I always have to care so much?" The sound of tires crunching on snow made her look up. A car had pulled into the alley entrance. It wasn't a normal car. It was a sleek black town car, its headlights cutting through the sleet like laser beams. The engine purred with quiet power. Sarah stood up, wiping her eyes frantically. Panic spiked in her chest. Was this a robbery? She looked for the door handle to get back inside, but it had locked automatically behind her. The rear window of the car rolled down. A face appeared in the darkness. It was James. Sarah froze. He wasn't looking at his phone this time. He was looking right at her. The car door opened and James stepped out. He didn't have his coat on. The snow fell onto his expensive suit, but he didn't seem to notice. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. In the harsh light of the security lamp, he looked older than he had in the diner. "Tired, haunted. Sarah Daniels," he said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "How do you know my name?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Did you look at my name tag? I know a lot more than your name." James said. He reached into his jacket pocket. Sarah flinched, stepping back against the icy wall. James pulled out a folded document. He held it out to her. "What is this?" Sarah asked, refusing to take it. "Read it," James said. His voice wasn't cruel anymore. It was apologetic. Sarah reached out with shaking hands and took the paper. She unfolded it under the buzzing yellow light. It was a letterhead, Sterling Property Management. Sarah gasped. Sterling was the company that owned her apartment complex, company that was evicting her. "I am James Sterling," the man said. "I own the building you live in. I own half the buildings on this block, including the lease on this diner." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The man she had lectured, the man she had shamed in front of his son, held her entire life in his hands. He could fire her. He could throw her on the street tonight. I'm sorry," Sarah stammered, terror gripping her throat. "I didn't know. I was just trying to help the boy. Please don't fire me. I need this job. I have a daughter." James held up a hand to stop her. He took a step closer. His eyes were wet. Was he crying? "Sarah," he said softly, "look at the document." Sarah looked down again. It wasn't an eviction notice. It was a receipt marked, paid in full, and below that a note scrawled in pen. Lease renewed for 12 months, prepaid. Sarah looked up, her mouth open, unable to form words. "Why?" she choked out. James let out a long, ragged sigh. He looked up at the falling snow. "My wife, Leo's mother. She died 6 months ago. Since then, I've been angry. I've been angry at the world. I thought everyone wanted something from me. I thought kindness was just a transaction." He looked back at Sarah. "Tonight I watched a woman who has nothing. Give everything she had to my son. You didn't know who I was. You didn't want a reward. You just wanted him to stop hurting." He reached into his other pocket and pulled out something else. It was the broken action figure, but it had been glued back together. Clumsily with too much glue, but it was whole. "Leo made me fix it in the car." James smiled weakly. "He told me that the nice lady said broken things can still be loved." James's voice cracked. He wiped a tear from his cheek. "I'm the broken thing, Sarah, and you woke me up." Sarah stood in the freezing alley, holding the paper that saved her home. The snow melted on her cheeks, mixing with her tears. "You paid my rent," she whispered. "For a year, it's the least I can do." James said, "But I want to do more. I looked into your file, Sarah. You're late on rent because of medical bills for your daughter." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "My company has a foundation." James said, his business tone returning but softer this time. We help families in crisis. Starting tomorrow, your daughter's medical expenses are covered, fully. Sarah fell to her knees in the slush. The relief was too much. It was a tidal wave. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed, not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming release of a burden she had carried alone for so long. James knelt down in the snow beside her. He didn't care about his suit pants. He put a hand on her shoulder. "Get up, Sarah," he said gently. "It's freezing out here." He helped her to her feet. "Leo is in the car," James said. "He wanted to give you something." Sarah wiped her face on her sleeve and walked with James to the car. The back window rolled down again. Leo was there. He was holding a new toy, a shiny blue superhero still in the box. But in his other hand, he held the $100 bill Sarah had given him. He held the money out the window. "Dad bought me the toy," Leo said, his voice bright and clear. "He said I should give this back to you. He said you need it for your little girl." Sarah took the bill. It was damp from Leo's hand. She looked at the boy's face. The sorrow was gone, replaced by the resilience of childhood. "Thank you, Leo," Sarah whispered, and Leo added, looking at his father. "Dad said we're going to come here for grilled cheese every Tuesday, but only if you're our waitress." James stood behind Sarah, looking at his son with a look of new, tender affection. "Every Tuesday." James confirmed. He turned to Sarah. "Go home to your daughter, Sarah. Sleep well tonight." James got into the car. The engine revved softly as the black sedan pulled away, disappearing into the white swirl of the storm. Sarah stood alone in the alley. She looked at the receipt in one hand, the $100 in the other. She looked up at the sky. The wind was still biting, but she didn't feel it anymore. She realized then that Mr. Henderson's tip hadn't just bought groceries. It had bought a lesson for a grieving father. It had bought a future for her daughter. And it had proven in a cold alley behind a diner that even when you feel empty, you always have something to give. Sarah walked to her rusted sedan, the snow crunching under her boots. She started the engine. It sputtered, then roared to life. She drove home to Lily, ready to tell her a story about a broken toy, a magic tip, and the night the world decided to be kind. Thanks for watching. If this story warmed your heart, please subscribe and visit the channel for more real-life stories about the power of kindness.